Well, now you're creating collisions, you're creating interactions, that doesn't
Hmm.
count anymore. So that double slit experiment is the idea of superposition and like splitting the like that. I'm not going to get into that. We aren't going to talk about that on this.
This is
Okay.
this
You
is
know,
not a physics show.
no, that's saved for my wife and me where we talk about, multiple realities and universes and telecommunication or what telekinesis. Anyway, I had a thought the other day that was basically I want to talk about how you used to have a parrot
Oh, uh-huh.
whose name was Frequent Flyer. And your last name, of course, is Miles.
Yes.
And it occurred to me that that might be the first iteration of my observation of one of your core skill sets, which is to like, which is it's like disparate ideas. Like you connect disparate ideas very well in your head, right?
Yeah.
And it happens quickly. Like you have a fast processor for that, and it always
Hmm.
seems so on target. Like as long as those variables are set. And so in this case, it's a parrot. Birds fly, frequent flyer Miles, and of course for short, she was called Freaky, which was
Freaky
awesome.
bird. Well, I'll
Freaky
do you one
bird.
better too. The name wasn't like me brainstorming. One of my coworkers came up to me and said, "I heard you getting a parrot," and I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "What are you going to call it?" At this point, I hadn't even thought about it yet, and I was like, "Frequent flyer Miles." Like I just was when asked, that's the answer I came up with, and then I was like, I kind of like that.
That
Like
definitely.
it was definitely a joke, but I was like, "Ooh," and then we'll call her Freaky Bird.
But that's your skill on display. That's what I mean. Like when I talk about like naming something, or like the other day we had a conversation, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to hit you with this out of nowhere because I know your processor is going to connect some crazy subconscious disparate ideas and connect them into something really brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, that was a perfect example of how that went. The story of the bird aside,
Right.
obviously that was dysfunctional, but regardless, was I literally the only other human that bird ever accepted?
Yeah,
Really?
one of the few. She definitely preferred guys. So when
That's true.
girls were over, she would call them over to the cage and act like she was going to be sweet, and she'd try to bite them.
Yeah. Well, she was protective of her lifelong mate. So,
That's right. Yeah.
uh, sadly.
And she thought my name was Bob. That's a whole
Oh
nother
yeah,
story.
that. Not
I'd
a
walk
show
in and
about
she'd
how your
go,
parrot called
"Hi,
you Bob.
Bob."
Yes, that is another story. So the idea that you connect disparate ideas and
Hmm.
that they come together, that was just occurring to me again as a superpower, because I do think that that's really important. I've been thinking a lot about this like brand strategy approach to everything. And, everybody struggles with the idea of like, who am I? What do I do? Who do I serve? And that clarity becomes almost impossible to find when you're in your own head, which again is why I leverage you for those ideas, because you can attack them from literally the the constraints of the moment with whatever I'm presenting you. I
Hmm.
have variable A and variable B, and I'm trying to come up with, I think, variable C. And you're like, whatever happens in your brain, instantly click, click, boom, it's this. And it's like, yeah, it is that. And I was thinking about it because the word clever comes to mind, right?
Hmm.
I think about the Fight Club scene, right? Where he says, that's very clever. And Ed Norton's character is so happy and proud about that. And he says, how's that working out for you? Right. And I love that scene. But like, I think about this and I'm like, well, if it is being clever, it's certainly working out quite well for Mr. Josh Miles. But I don't think it is that. I think that's superficial, right?
Yeah.
And so I get intrigued by this idea of like, what is that inside our brains that allows us to create these connections between disparate ideas to communicate something new, because
Yeah.
that's kind of the exercise of positioning,
Hmm.
and you probably could think back. I referenced the parrot story, but you could probably think back to your childhood about being able to connect these sorts of things between music or art or drawing or reading or
Hmm.
any observation that you made socially or whatever. Um, I sometimes wonder, man. I think that we're kind of born with that. I think there's something going on with people from an early age who are able to kind of see the bigger landscape and connect those ideas. I think that lends itself to designers and strategists and creators.
Yeah, I think from a design perspective too, like I've often been the guy who in the first meeting I scribble down the idea in my notebook and I go back later and 3 months from now that's the logo that gets approved is the one that looks just like the sketch. Like it's the like, oh, I get this. Like here are the things. And And then like you still go through the process and you still go through the let's come up with a couple different ideas and or even have another designer working on it and like, okay, I want your input too. And then, that sketch ends up being the one that gets approved like 9 times out of 10. Like it's kind of weird.
It's like the expression of the gut feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and that only improves over time. You
Right.
think about
Yeah.
the story of the city logo or whatever,
Yeah.
and which I've never landed that plane. Was that Paula Scher?
I think Paula and Michael were in the same meeting.
Yeah,
I don't remember whose sketch it was, but I
it
think
doesn't
it
matter.
was,
It
yeah.
was Pentagram, right, at the
Mm-hmm.
time. So whatever it was, but that story resonates because that just continues to sharpen and sharpen over time. And again, I think it is because you accumulate all this experience connecting all of these disparate ideas into one cohesive narrative and making sense of that. And I think that there's that, we call it magic or whatever, but I think that that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you think of all the great artists or writers over time, and yes, they had a core thread through the piece that they were working on at the time, something that fundamentally they wanted to say. But really, that's an exercise in specificity when you spread that out over a 300-page novel, right? Or like a giant
Mm-hmm.
painting or mural or something. And like I'm actually rereading right now the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Persig's book, which is one of my
Mm-hmm.
all-time favorite books. I haven't read that in, gosh, probably 15 years, and I'm starting to reread it again. And I'm mostly curious about what my reaction is to it after 15 or 20 plus years of life.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been fortunate enough to be along for that ride, or unfortunate enough, depending on how we want to look at it. So how much has changed in life. And I mean, anybody's
Right.
life changes over that amount of time. And so it's going to be really fascinating to go, hey, the way I remember this, the singular distillation of that entire book in my mind as a sort of profound statement on quality. I mean, that's really how I kind of see it. Am I going to still see it that way? Is it still going to register that way? What have I picked up in the last 20 years that's going to be part of my equation now in the way that I see it? And so part of reading that book is sort of an exercise in that, is sort of a, hey, this is a mirror that I'm going to look at and compare to the mirror I looked at 20 years ago. And I'm really fascinated by that idea. I think our work kind of goes the same way. Like, what does that make you think when you think back into the arc of like your career, your expression over 20 years?
Well, I think it's really interesting that you bring that up now in that, as all of these AI things are happening right now, um, I had a chance to play around with the Photoshop beta earlier this week. And, it's got this generative fill is kind of like the hot topic. Uh, I had a photo of my youngest son. He was eating a hot dog on his last day of school. I did a loose lasso around the hot dog, did the generative fill and said, replace with a bouquet of flowers. And it not only placed the bouquet in his hand, but it changed the orientation of his hand so it made sense with the flowers in it. Um, and it blew my mind. Like one for one was amazing. Now, my son was standing over my shoulder and we were trying a couple other things. I was like, put a undersea water helmet on him that looks like a fishbowl. I'm picturing the 1950s cartoon,
Yeah.
and what it did was it changed his face to a fish and it put the bowl over his head. And I was like, okay, that doesn't work. And then he's got long curly hair. And I said, okay, give him a buzz cut. And it changed his face like it was a different child with like short curly hair. And
Yeah.
then I tried it again and it was worse yet. And so then the last thing we tried was I said, okay, put him at the beach. So I selected just the background, said put him at the beach. And that was pretty convincing. Um, but tying back to all this, like number one, they're not all winners. And some of
Mhm.
them were just ridiculous and awful, but some of them were really, really good. So when you come back to this quality thing and we get into this realm of AI, I think even like in the early days of social media, we brought like other like quote unquote designers out of the woodwork as the need for content started to increase and now increasing more and we're adding AI to the mix. And for guys like you and I who have this bias towards quality, it's
Mhm.
like how do I make these tools, these toys work in a workflow where I expect an 11 out of 10, and sometimes I'm getting like a 6, and sometimes I'm getting a 3. And like, how do we put up with those? In that the art of motorcycle maintenance idea is like working with your hands and getting dirty and like really getting in there and understanding the craft. And this whole AI push is really the total opposite. It's like completely letting go of anything you can control and just let the machine do its thing.
Yeah, man. I mean, this topic, it's wild because, it's obviously become the buzzword of the day. I mean, this is what everybody wants to talk about. And we are absolutely at the tip of the iceberg watching it happen. So I do think the quality issue I mean, it's going to be more evident right now. It's a sketch, I
Yeah.
mean, it's just starting out. Even if you look at like OpenAI's work, in Chat GPT or something.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, some of it's nonsense, or Bard. I mean, I started playing with Bard, and because it's connected to the internet. So I said, "Hey, go assess my Twitter handle. Like, go to @Torrey and tell me,
Hmm.
what did I tell it to do?" The prompt was something along the lines of like, assess his tweet style, assess all of his tweets, and tell me what his account is about. And it comes back with this complete fanboy, like, oh, he's the best. He's so encouraging and positive, and he talks about solopreneurship and business and all this stuff. And I'm like, I love you, Bard. Like, you're the best. And then at the bottom, it says, it said something like his 3 most popular tweets. And I read them and I'm going, okay, I don't remember saying that. And I search, and spoiler alert, I never said any of it. I never said any of those things. Now, it picked up topics outside of like what those top 3 tweets are. So I know it assessed my account, but it made up complete and utter garbage for like what I actually said in what was supposed to be my top 3 tweets.
Oh, that's
And
hilarious.
oh yeah, so I'm like, I think you're misremembering my albums with someone else's, Bard. But I'm glad you like it. But yeah, I think that the messiness of the beginning of this thing is just natural. And I think that
Hmm.
the underpinnings of what it's actually trying to do, there's a clear pathway to quality, if you want to call it that. And so I think what fascinates me is this idea of so the people want to go to the nth degree of like, oh, we're all screwed. White collar jobs, any creator jobs, they're all
Right.
screwed because this
Yeah.
thing can replace. And I don't dispute that necessarily over a long enough arc of time.
Hmm.
And you think back to late 1800s, early 1900s, industrial revolution, I mean, if you were planting seeds in fields by hand, there's absolutely no debate when you start to see the, seeding machine that can plant 8 rows at a time, you know what I mean, behind one person on a tractor. Like, there's just no way that you're going to be able to dispute that that's not going to take over. And I do think that there are some very obvious lines where we're like, oh yeah, that's over, that's done.
Hmm.
However, you still need the person to operate the machinery. You then need somebody in that case to fix the machinery, to build the machine. I mean, look at all the jobs and the explosion of, industry and all the things that came out of that, right? So we can't predict all of those.
Right.
I do think the most honest place to be right now is that the people who learn to use these tools in their own processes are going to rapidly outperform those who don't. I think that's obvious at this point.
Hmm.
And I think that's any type of creators. Um, Speaking to Photoshop's beta, generative fill right now, the most exciting thing I found about their demo was when they highlighted the road and took away all of the like nasty,
Hmm.
tar lines and everything. And
Yeah.
why? Because I happen to shoot photos for real estate, retail developers where I'm battling stupid things like that,
You're like a
and
parking lot specialist.
I mean, seriously, like I've had to deal with this so many times, and to the point where I just tell my clients, like, if you want that to look better, wait, maybe you should just repave it because it looks like
Yeah.
crap in real life, and I'm not going to make it look like it doesn't look. I'll take out, a piece of trash that blew in to the frame or whatever. I
Right.
don't have any problem there. But at the end of the day, like there's an ethical line here, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of fixing those little things, like it's very easy for me to imagine selecting an entire lower half of a frame and saying, remove all debris, from
Hmm.
this thing, and it will know what I'm saying and get that all out of there. And when I look at something like they had the example of the deer where they took it out of nature and put it in like a back alley, with a
Hmm.
sign pointing into a doorway or something. There's a style to it, right? It's not
Yeah.
photorealistic. It's a
Hmm.
style to it, and it clearly can play in that style. It's kind of like Midjourney at the beginning. Like some of the
Sure.
best prompts from Midjourney were actually let it do its own stylistic thing because it
Hmm.
had a really cool whatever it was trained on. Well, I don't know how they built that exactly, but um, over time, there's a clear pathway to this needs to look exactly like this and perfect. And I often kind of, to get back to quality, I think it's going to change that word for us. There's going to end up being a sort of
Mm.
hyper quality. This comes back to like the man. I mean, this reminds me of like the concept of Ubermensch, or whatever, like the superhuman, the super person. Like when you can start to picture and imagine, well, what is that person, right?
Yeah.
And all ethics aside from what that came out of, you do start to go like, okay, well, we can look at society, can look at any craft, we can look at any individual and go, what's the ultimate perfection of that?
Hmm.
And humans, I mean, for all the benefits of striving after that, there's also total entanglement and destruction if we do that too much because we are not perfect. And yet this AI purports to be perfect, right? So how do we deal with that?
Right. Well, maybe on a lighter note,
Yeah, I brought it down. Sorry.
in the 90s, as computer graphics technology got better and better and better. So like you could sit down at a Mac and lay something out in the late 90s and click and see it happen as you go, where 5 years before you would click and wait
Mhm.
and click and wait. So when you got to do this really responsive kind of design, um, things got really clean and tidy really fast. And then there was at the same time in the world, like this whole grunge movement was happening, which was kind of a push against that. So even guys like David Carson were working within the Mac, but making things that look completely handmade. And I think that's also when we had a whole lot of at least from my perspective, that's when a whole lot of the retro stuff started happening too. So when we could make things perfect and clean and look brand new, people immediately kind of pushed against that and went, how do I make it look older? How do I make it look worn? How do I make it look like it's handmade, even though it's made in the computer? So my guess is we'll see some of that too, which is even though we can use AI to make it perfectly and instantly, how do we make it look like it's not made with AI? So I think we'll probably see that duality really soon, and the push against like it's even musically, like when music also started going electronic and being produced completely in a computer around that same time, like a late 90s thing where people were going from tape to digital, but then how do we make the digital sound as good as the analog?
Yeah, where they're doing the fake record overlay
Right.
scratch
The
thing,
scratchy things, doing all
Yes.
that in post. And
Man, this is you're bringing back. I mean, this is what and again, I'm trying to read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance with an open mind again to go, hey, how do I try to get back to first principles while I read it, knowing I already read it and that it's somewhere in my brain. But you're speaking exactly to one of the first points that he attacks and picks out is, his friends own a brand new BMW motorcycle, which are these legendary, on their reliability scale.
mhm,
And in their mind, they don't want to touch it. I bought this perfect machine that's known for its reliability. I should never have to touch it.
yeah,
And so I'm going to ride this thing. Well, then inevitably, very practical issues arise in riding that motorcycle, and they're frustrated by that.
mhm,
And of course, the main character, the narrator, he's very familiar with every single aspect of his motorcycle and how to tune it and how to, adapt to its needs and how to understand, everything that goes into fixing it and keeping it running appropriately. And that's what he's speaking to right here, is
mhm,
this idea that this strive for infinite perfection is unrealistic, and there's a pushback to that, and we react to that, and we say, well, that doesn't, we don't like in other words, perfection is should not be the goal. This is
mhm,
really the interesting thing to me, because we get into these scenarios where gosh, it's hard not to bring philosophy and religion into this, man. I mean, you think about the Buddha or something and this idea of enlightenment, right? And there's always this sense of purity, right? Of like washing away all of the things. I mean, the same thing in Christianity, right? Like this idea of washing away the impurities to remain pure. And that speaks to something very deep and fundamental in our hearts, right? That we just
Mm-hmm.
notice, to coin one of the terms you love to use and I love as well now, is head trash, like you have head trash, you have soul trash, you have heart trash, you have all this stuff that accumulates, and we intrinsically recognize that that sort of contributes to our pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Buddhism focuses on this pretty hardcore, right? Is like life is suffering. And so being able to escape that suffering is really what is the basis for enlightenment. Obviously, I'm, simplifying that down to the nth degree, but at the core, that's kind of most philosophies and religions, is how do we remove all of the stuff that we keep throwing on and believing that we need as we chase these like corporeal desires and these states of life that we pretend are going to bring us some sort of joy and happiness. And yet that source of joy and happiness was always within. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
reductive process. It's not an additive process. And that just so happens to follow the arc of our own humanity as well. We're perfectly happy with simplicity as a child. And then we start to learn about stuff and tools and toys and experiences. And we just build and build and build and build and build all through midlife, and we chase them. And then we finally come back to the point where we realize none of that ever mattered. It was always about the people we loved, the people we cared about. And so I'm fascinated by this because I think that everything that we do as creators is a reflection of the human condition. I mean, this from me. I've talked about this forever. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
like writing got me into design and strategy, and ultimately now into, understanding branding and helping individuals, because, and by extension, my writing came out of reading. When
Mm-hmm.
I'm as a teen reading, Dostoevsky, I'm sitting there going like, okay, what do I do with that? And then you write about this and you try to figure out, well, what is it about the human condition that we need to speak to? And there's nothing that's the central hub. Everything else is a spoke from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel like once we lose that humanity, we end up giving up a part of ourselves. And that kind of, tie that back to the AI thing, right?
Yeah.
We're dangerously close to giving up that part of our creation, but we don't. I should rephrase this really. I mean, we are going to give it up. We're going to give up what we have conventionally known as something that's expressive and creative. When you can see something that would have taken an artist a week or a month to create, done in one prompt, even though we lack a bit of control, I'm not convinced that we won't ultimately have fine tuning abilities to basically, prompt that thing down to just like a painter prompts a paintbrush. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? It's the same thing, just two different tools. And I believe it will get down to that granular of a level. So it's going to just change creativity, but we also abdicate something to the computer, as you said, to the fundamental code that's put in that thing. That's what we have to figure out. Is we're okay abdicating a certain degree. How much are we going to abdicate? And what
Right.
does this enable us to do?
Yeah. And even you think about the painter and the paintbrush, we skipped ahead of that into computer not that long ago, and but we can still go back and paint. So it's not like the paintbrush goes away. It's not like the manual design process goes away. It's not like the AI goes away or the next generation of that, which probably happens, next month.
Right.
At this point, it's just going to go faster and faster and faster. So we can always have those fallbacks. And it'll be interesting to see, is there an in between? Is there can you get in and manually massage the thing that the AI made for you? Or do you go further the other direction? Is it even like, as I think it, I can see it differently?
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, you keep pulling this thread. That is what it is. I mean, the next step
Yeah.
is going to be video, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we've already seen what they're starting to mess with when it comes to video. And it's not just, we talked about this the other day, that you have like short form video content creation, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
and you have these people creating all these clips of videos and then mashing them together. And inevitably they're layering all of the B-roll on top of it because nobody wants to just stare at somebody's face the entire time. So they're like, B-roll, we need B-roll. And so you get all of these different, stock footage clips strung together. And the human is using their discretion to go, well, that statement that the person just made is about this clip. And now I'm going to go find that clip. I search for it, I find it, I
Mm-hmm.
grab it, I throw it into the timeline. The AI is doing that now. And the thing about that is that's not where the future is. Like that's an easy problem to solve. You just have a certain prompt that follows along the script and says, I want 3 successive 1-second clips of money in
Mm-hmm.
these 3. Oh, okay, cool. Well, it just goes and finds the catalog of money clips and it gives you choices and you go, yeah, that one, that one, that one, boom, clip together.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want any transitions between them? Nah, hard transition, no problem. Okay, well, how many years before this is not a B-roll library. It is, I want a picture of money, exchanging hands. I want whatever. And it generates it literally right there, just like Midjourney generates still images now.
Yeah.
We all know that that's happening and going to happen. And then you layer on the technology that's going to allow that to happen in real time with augmented reality, for example, which is,
Mm-hmm.
as a designer, by far the thing I've been the most excited about. Even pre-AI, I've been excited about that. Now with AI, I'm like, that's going to get weird. And as a designer, you want to play with it. I mean, there's 2 things that you make me think about. One is we're old enough to remember the transition from print to digital, right? I don't know about you. When was the last time you were on a physical like press check?
Oh, long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly don't remember the last time I had to go to a printing shop for a
Mm-hmm.
press check to make sure everything was coming off the printer okay before they went to bindery or whatever.
Yeah.
And
And even
so,
then it was probably like, yep, good.
yeah,
You know,
right, exactly. It
the
had gotten
last few
so
times
good.
it had just gotten so good. And for those of you without the gray hair who don't even know what this is, like you would go to a printing company where the paper was literally coming off the printing presses and you would weigh in like, oh, this blue seems a little too green in this area. Can we adjust that? Or this bleed doesn't look right, or we need to literally stop the presses where this phrase came from and make a change to the physical plate that gets inked up, that prints the ink on the paper. And as designers, that was kind of our last opportunity to catch anything, to catch a typo, to catch a low res photo, to catch anything that's not coming off right. And
Yeah,
anymore, we've just sort of said, we don't need to see that. Or there's so much of it that's digital. There's nothing to change. Like this is the product you get. And the art of dialing in the press check just isn't a thing anymore.
right. Yeah, it's completely gone and has been, for a
Yeah.
while. And
Mm-hmm.
that transition has opened up new opportunities for new forms of expression and creativity, which has been really exciting as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it has changed the way that we communicate. And as designers, how we leverage really what our core expertise is, which is clear communication, and adapt it to the media as it changed. And I think an even more profound moment is when you go back and study the advent of photography. And I had this in college. I had this history of photography class that was just fantastic. The professor was incredible, and the very first class was these slides where he went through the kind of arc of the broad historical record of art, right,
Mm-hmm.
from like cave paintings all the way up to the late 1800s. And you saw the similarities and you saw subtle, style shifts and maybe different cultural influences as they kind of went and gone along. And then you get to the very first instances of basically abstraction, right? Like art as an
Mm-hmm.
abstract. And he shows, Kandinsky and Pollock and all the others that, came down the line. And he basically strings them all together in a timeline so you can kind of see it and how, like, all the way at this other end, it's very different. And he just asks a simple question: what changed? And you realize, like, I mean, how could you make a more profound statement of like, yes, the cultural societal shift of technology that came about, well, because of the technology of photography, the
Mm-hmm.
cultural and societal shift that came about was so profound that you saw it in the art first. And then, of course, you see it actually in photography itself, from the very
Mm-hmm.
pose, stoic people all the way up to what we have now with, whatever, Instagram reels. And
Right.
so it's a really fascinating story about how profound our own societal and individual, behaviors change and shift and what we value. I mean, even what we want to look at and go, hey, I want to explore that idea, the idea of abstract thought in visual form. That was not, I doubt that was a human concept. You know what I mean? Outside of storytelling, where maybe there's shape shifting and some really wild ideas, but I'm not convinced that they didn't believe that was actually a thing. You know what I mean? In certain societies too. So I think it's really fascinating to watch that I think, are at the biggest pivotal moment since then. And I know the
Yeah.
digital age is very significant, and obviously it allows and facilitates this to even happen.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like the arc of history is going to, it's going to feel a little bit more like a footnote compared to what photography did and then what AI is going to do.
Yeah, the AI photography thing is a real challenge. I mean, I'm seeing photographers online talking about, is this the death of photography? You know, so it's like you were talking about before with the mid-journey thing, you could easily hop on AI and get this super stylistic image of whatever you want, whenever you want. You don't need to go hire a photographer to get it. Um, but I don't think, again, I think we can always go backwards. Like, just because we have digital doesn't mean there aren't people who are just as interested in film now as ever. And seeing some really big digital creators going back to learn film photography and see what that opens up and the constraints that that brings in. So I think we're going to pull things forward. It'll just be interesting to see like what that next evolution purely on the photo side is.
Yeah, and we can't know until people start doing it. There's no way we could have predicted. I mean, you started seeing what the impressionists, that was the first clue is,
Mm-hmm.
hey, wait a minute. They're not just depicting what they see as accurately as possible now, Like they started to mess with it a little bit. And
Yeah.
that was something really fascinating because outside of like Hieronymus Bosch, and a few others in the past, that just wasn't a thing, And
Yeah.
so and it's interesting actually thinking about somebody like Bosch, it's like, what is that person? Who's that person? Like, what's that going to look like right now?
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, there's a regressivist approach, which is sort of like kind of like Portland in the mid 2000s of like, well, let's just go back to everything as it was before, right?
Right.
And I'm going to start like, making my own, shaving cream and whatever. The entire Portlandia series covered that perfectly. But that, and again, back to Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance.
Or
That's
will it be the AI that innovates?
well, that's what I mean. Like we
Like,
don't know.
does it push further than, does that become the artist that stands out is the next AI thing?
It I It's hard to predict because you're introducing this new human
Mm-hmm.
effectively. Pretend it's just this new novel. It's like an alien, I guess, that landed and is like, everything you guys do, yeah, I do that times 1,000, right? And
Right.
it's messy right now. So we have to shift our context of what these things are even for. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something when you think about, photography, for example, like, is this the death of photography? Well, in the sense of a wedding and capturing somebody's moment at a wedding, Midjourney's not going to do that. Or, what did I say? Midjourney, whatever the spinoff of the video and
Right.
photo version of
Uh-huh.
Midjourney, whatever that we capture weddings now, like you're not going to be able to capture that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, and so there's going to be a difference in the way we look at that. Now, you could replicate it, you could recreate it, you could come up with a fake version. You could take photos of people and go, hey, pretend they have a wedding, make a whole video about it.
Mm-hmm.
The AI can definitely do those things. But we are, I think, going to go back to a kind of an emphasis in the corporeal, real, like time-based existence that we are flesh and bone humans. And I think that there's, again, to kind of pick on Portland a little bit. I mean, that's what they were seeking, right? That's what they wanted to go back to, is something more human, this
Yeah.
more intrinsic, more ethereal, not ethereal. What's the word I'm looking for? Like this intrinsic, instinctive, sort of natural humanness that makes us who we really are at the core. I think that's going to just continue to be a need for people.
Mm-hmm.
It already is, man. I mean, the AI is just going to throw gasoline on the fire. We already see people who are having a very difficult time reconnecting with their humanness.
Mm-hmm.
Social media alone, it's like you can't put yourself in a world where everything you post is the top 5 percentile slice of perfection and put that out there as if it's 100%. And you can't take in everybody else's content with that top 5%, cream
Mm-hmm.
of the cream at the top, right? Like that's the thing that they're all projecting, and look at that and go, that's actual humanity. That's healthy. It forms all the tribes where if you make one mistake, you're out forever and you should burn in hell. Screw you, right? Like every
Mm-hmm.
single tribe has that like hard line now. It foments all of the like unnatural, unhuman, divisive nonsense that we see. It facilitates a lot of great things too. But at the same time, that's the challenge that we have, is how do we maintain what makes us human in a world where the vast majority of the tasks that we used to think made us human are no longer performed by humans? What do we do with that? And we're like the painters who have to learn that the way we used to paint was not really what made us human. And I think
Hmm.
that's what the abstractionists and some of the people that came even in art and, like from all forms of art, music, writing, fine art, that's where they went. They were like, well, let's explore then what it means to be human. How do I paint music? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That kind of stuff intrigues me a lot. And I know that you can prompt AI to do all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. But I think that humans are going to find a way, even if they use it as a tool, to dig it to a deeper level of humanness and humanity. I hope, at least, because I think
Yeah.
that that's a healthier approach.
Yeah. Have you heard the AI Oasis album?
No, I have
So
not.
there's this band that, so I think what the process was they wrote the songs and they then modeled a voice AI to sing the songs like Liam. And when I first heard it, I misunderstood. Like I thought AI had created the entire album. And I was like, well, it's over. We're there. We skipped ahead like
Uh-huh.
1,000 times and we're there already because they're calling it the lost album. So it was like around mid 90s Oasis sound, and
Hmm.
you get a little bit of like the one song has a little Champagne Supernova vibe, and a lot of the stuff that was coming out in that like 95, 96 time frame, it sounds just like this version of Oasis. And if people want to look it up, it's the name is a little confusing because it sounds like ISIS, but it's AISIS instead of Oasis, it's AISIS.
Gotcha.
So that can be a little troubling just in the marketing maybe of of the
Yeah, a
band.
little, the brand's a little troubling.
But I listened to it a couple times through. I was like, I kind of dig this. Like it's got some nostalgic vibes to it, but also like it didn't have the hit power of real Oasis. It just definitely had the sound. And
Mm.
so like training that voice AI to sound just like the lead singer of Oasis or whoever you want it to. I ran into one just yesterday that was Sinatra singing, raunchy rap lyrics, which was hilarious. Uh, and to like the pacing of a Sinatra song or whatever also. And at this point, like these are probably not things that could be commercially monetized, but as the other thing is happening right now, my little rabbit hole brain is going down all these trails, is like the writer's strike is happening in Hollywood right now.
Mm.
And if that doesn't get resolved quickly, it's probably going to go to an actor strike and to directors and other things too. But one of the major things that is of question right now is the role of AI in creating these things.
Right.
And if actors can sign off on having their likeness used,
Mm.
Disney, Marvel is sort of famously de-aging and bringing back people who are dead or showing young Skywalker in new episodes where Luke is in his, I think, early 60s, late 50s now, probably early 60s. And so it looks just like Luke from Return of the Jedi. And the legality and the ethics and all of those things, of those elements, this new Indiana Jones movie is purportedly going to have Harrison Ford de-aged for a big chunk of the movie because it's like time travels involved in that. It's just, there's a whole lot happening here,
Yeah.
and it's not just graphic designers freaking out that Photoshop is really fast and imaginative now. This is going to hit entertainment, it's hitting business, it's hitting uh this is a highly impactful technology.
Absolutely, man. I mean, it's you're augmenting so much of what humans have done and leveraged to create value for each other, and
Hmm.
you're putting that on a system and a platform that can literally millions and millions of times its ability to get that done.
Yeah.
And again, it's messy at the beginning. And what's really interesting, I think, and so speaking of like movies or albums, things like that, where, there's this old Ani DeFranco line, something about how records used to be a recording of an event, right? She's, it's Ani DeFranco, but, and then she's talking about how like this is, I think probably that album was maybe late 90s when she's making this critique about how it has all become about branding. Like the corporate
Mhm.
record executives, are making these like branded records with all these cross promotions and, selling sunglasses and shoes and something else. I can't remember the exact line, but anyway, and the point is like, we think about it being a printed recording. Like you go to a studio, you record, you do some digital mastering and things at the end of the day, but it's a recording. And that's why we like the live experience, because now we get to go and watch it in real time being done as the night unfolds in front of us. And that's the thing that I think is the obvious next leap here is when we think about music or we think about movies. The technology is already in place where if you can imagine that we have biosensors that read our brainwaves, which is very easy to do. Like I can put a brain cap on you right now and go, is Josh happy or sad, excited or
Sure.
bored? Like that's very easy,
Mhm.
right? And with a basic set of prompts, Josh could get something started saying, I want to watch a sci-fi movie about intergalactic travel where they meet, friendly aliens and hostile aliens. And I want a love story thing or whatever, like you come up with this initial parameters, right? And it
I
starts
do
to
want to
play.
watch that movie.
I was going to say, being a movie guy, I suck at movies, so I'm probably explaining one that already exists. Anyway, did I just describe Battlestar Galactica or something?
I think it's probably most of the sci-fi movies.
Right. So like anyway, like the idea is it would measure your responses as it unfolded to say, does he want this ramped up or ramped down? Oh wait,
Mhm.
he's starting to get a little bored. I'm going to inject an action scene in this. It's going to unfold in real time in front of us. These
Yeah.
the movies and the music, by the way. There's a
Mhm.
there's a it's not even like a non-zero chance. I think it's a guarantee that we are going to absolutely in our lifetime, it probably in the next 5 to 10 years tops, we will be listening to music that was never created before it hit our ears and will never be heard again after it hit our ears.
Mhm.
As in real time, playing off of sensory reactions that we're largely not even aware of as we unfold in front of us. That's the reality. And so
Yeah,
what do
I
you do
think
with that?
I've heard it even as movies. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I want to watch this movie, but I want to see myself as the
Oh
lead
yeah.
character
Oh
and
yeah.
swap
I didn't
in
even think
this,
of that.
or like swap in my favorite actress to be the love interest in. I want to watch the same movie with a different person and or
Mhm.
different voice or different score or different, like, change the setting.
Exactly. And
It's not in the old
again,
west, it's in space.
right. Um, I would like the Western better now that you mention it. I want Tombstone with me. Maybe a little less conflict. It seemed a little conflict oriented. I don't
Right.
think I ever saw that all the way through. That doesn't shock you, given that the
Oh,
last movie I saw in the theater was The Dark Knight with you.
right.
Yeah. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Well,
dude,
you've got
it's
some homework if you haven't seen Tombstone all the way through. That's a
I know. It's on. Everyone can judge me. I don't care. Judge me. Whatever. I don't watch movies. All right. So
I'd be a daisy if you do.
I know, right? I do know that line. Well, it's got Val Kilmer. I love Val Kilmer. What a great guy.
Yeah.
So you know what? I did watch the latest Top Gun here at home with my
Oh,
kids
okay.
and wife.
That's good.
Talk about a transformational movie for me as a kid, man.
Oh, yeah.
I was dead set on going to the Navy to be a pilot. And that movie, I'm sure played a role, but I was on that before him. My dad was in the Navy. I was like, yeah, we're doing this. And then, of course, at the age of like 12 or 13, I found out I have a cataract in my eye I was born with. There goes the perfect vision. There goes the dream of being a Navy pilot, right? Probably best for how it all turned out. But there's a part of me that like I was up at the Chicago what is it, like the technology museum or whatever they call it. I can't remember the name of it.
Museum of Science and Technology.
Yeah, that's the one. And they have these flight simulators that completely do like barrel roll 360s and everything. And you're flying an F4 Phantom, Josh. And I don't know about you, but that's the most beautiful and incredible aircraft ever created. And you're flying it and you're literally, spinning and going around. And I literally got out of that thing and I was like, how much does that cost? Like, I
Yeah.
need to know right now how much it costs for me to build that.
Yeah.
And there's just something about it that's just so thrilling. And I still like watching that movie again. I was like, oh, this is like bringing all of that back to me. Um, and I think about, again, if you could wear a set of augmented reality goggles, or even just sitting in front of a TV and it's reading your whatever, and it's like he wants that
Hmm.
emotion brought back from
Yeah.
whatever 9-year-old Torrey, right? And I'm going to bring that back in a movie, but I'm going to add some things that he's learned since then, and I'm going to
Yeah.
make it relevant to him now. This is all happening, man. All
There's
happening.
this concept in film and video games and whatever else, when things are computer generated and they're not quite right enough, they call
Oh
that
yeah.
the uncanny
Mhm.
valley. So it's
Yep.
like not weird enough that you see it as cartoon, and not real enough that you see it as real, but it's like what's wrong here? And the
Mhm.
thing about that Top Gun movie that they did so well, it's so interesting, that kind of flies in the face of all this AI and technology stuff, is so many of those scenes were shot practically, where the camera is in a jet and the actor is in the jet, and the background that you see is the world whooshing by as they film this thing for real.
Yeah.
Like the actors had to learn how to hit record on their camera, because
That's
they had
awesome.
to, when they said action, they had to hit the button,
How wild is
which
that?
is just so wild. And it's why that film looks so amazing and pulls so many of these nostalgia heartstrings and all these other things, because it's an effectively like a real action movie where you're really seeing the action that's happening. So sort of flying in the face of all of our CG whatnot that's happening today.
Well, that is this the sort of, again, the like Portland reaction that we're going to just continue to see, is
Yeah.
that again, things become so perfect,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, and when it comes to AI, so completely unbelievable. I mean, in terms
Yeah.
of like suspending disbelief, that we just simply crave real. And we
Yeah.
want the story behind, just like you explaining that they had to hit record. Like, what an incredible detail that when you watch that movie, if you know the details behind how it was made, even though
Hmm.
none of that is physically in the film itself, it adds to your experience of watching that film. There's a
Yeah.
context there now that is like, while everything else is generated by AI and completely quote unquote fake,
Hmm.
this thing here was created in a way that it was limited by humans. They had to get they had constraints that the AI doesn't. So at the end of the day, that's really it, right? That we have to learn what those constraints are, and we're going to have to learn how to frame and play our own creativity and problem solving into our own constraints to feel and be different than the AI and what it's doing. I mean, I think that we're going to continue to find that. I really do. I think that humans are going to find a deeper level of humanness and human connection to create the contrast to what is ultimately going to be a wild ride of AI and all kinds of fantastical, cool, and amazing
Yeah.
experiences. But we're still going to crave the core fundamental human experiences, I think, under that.
What's crazy is if we're doing these conversations every couple weeks, half of the examples that we've talked about have just come out in the last couple of weeks. Like, what's the next thing that's going
Yeah,
to
we better
evolve before
publish.
we chat again? Right.
Exactly. Yeah, we have 1 week
Yeah.
shelf
We
life on
can't,
these
we
things. Yeah.
can't let these sit.
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, it's well, like I told you before, like that beta of the video with the B-roll and stuff. There's kids right now that are dropping hundreds of dollars on a course to learn how to do, short form video promotion for people or something. And you've got 6 to 12 months, and
Yeah.
it's game over. You may as well
Right.
be training people how to hand transcribe audio and overlay it, which people
Right.
used to do just mere years ago.
Right.
And so, it's really fascinating. It's really wild. And in some ways it's going to change our economies fundamentally as well. I mean, we're already
Yeah.
seeing that. There's a massive shift from white collar to blue collar right now, for example.
Hmm.
Um, we're just now seeing that does have a long shelf life. We'll come back in a year and be like, see, um, but that only lasts in as much as we learn how to adapt, right?
Hmm.
But man, the pace of this one, I don't know. I don't know how we get our hands around that. In the last 6 months, like you said, I mean, if we would have recorded this 6 months ago, we wouldn't even be talking about this kind of stuff yet. So yeah, fascinating, man. I think it's a great way to kick off some conversation about these kind of things.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good place to land it. And we'll see what changes for next time.
Sure, man. Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah.